The title of this is Ideas Changing the World. I think that's a terrific title, provided they're your ideas and not your competitors' ideas. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to get those ideas into the minds of your customers and your prospects. But one warning, ideas that change the world are very hard to come by. You're not going to get a lot of those. I think a lot of companies should be focusing on ideas that change their company. And I'm going to spend a lot of time on that particular issue. All right, let's start with the world. All the world has become a marketing problem. It is a tough, competitive, and difficult world out there. Whatever you're selling, it's not easy. And there's an ugly fact of life. You know, if you make a mistake, your competitors quickly get your business. And what's worse, you rarely get it back. That is the environment out there. So, what do? Well, number one, you learn from the past. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Very famous quote from George Santayana. But I like this one better. Learning from mistakes. Learning from your mistakes is good. Learning from the mistakes of others is better. That's my quote. And it's less painful, less costly. So it's a learning process, and I'm here to sort of talk about a few mistakes out there that you can learn from. Now, there's a tool you use in this new environment, positioning. And it's the essence of the strategy you must employ to deal with global competition, both home and abroad. It's the starting point for all your planning and your marketing. In other words, when you set out to drive those ideas into the minds of your marketplace, positioning is the tool. Unfortunately, when I first started to talk about this subject many years ago, the world has changed. It has become a very difficult world. Today you have what I call the 3 C's that threaten business: competition, change, and crisis. And that is really the environment that everybody who is in this global economy is in the middle of. Now, the first book on positioning was written in 1980. It was a classic, very popular book. It's traveled around the globe. And remember, it says the battle for your mind. And it really is a book about how the mind works. In the book, there were twins. There was positioning, but there was one chapter entitled Repositioning the Competition. And interestingly enough, nobody paid much attention to the repositioning twin. So just to get the definitions down, first of all, it's positioning defined. It's how you differentiate your product in the mind of the prospect. In other words, this is how you want to essentially separate yourself from your competition. You're driving that idea into the mind. So that's the basic definition. Now, the twin, repositioning, is how do you adjust perceptions in the mind of the prospects. In other words, you're in there, people perceive you, but because of some changes, you have to make some adjustments. And that's the environment we're in today. Many companies are facing, how do I adjust? And that is the subject of the new book, Repositioning, Marketing in an Era of Competition, Change, and Crisis. This is the first country where I've really formally introduced this book. It just came out this month. So you're sort of ahead of the curve. But it is really, in a way, it completes this body of work that started in 1980, and it's finishing up in almost 2010, 40 years. Competition. Let's go to the first C. So in other words, let's deal with the world as we see it out there. Competition. The business world continues to be more competitive. What we used to see as competition now looks like a tea party. We're in a world of killer competition. And it's a battle of brands. endless sea of brands, which introduces what we call the tyranny of choice. In other words, your customers have choice, endless choice. And that's why you don't get your business back. They move on. Give you how, in the United States, for example, every time I count the number of brands, it's interesting. Dog food, 180 brands of dog food. I showed this slide in China, and they thought this was very funny. I said, what's so funny? They said, in China, we eat the dogs. You have a cough or you have a cold. What to take is almost impossible. Almost impossible. There's so many variations. Bottled water, I counted around the globe 2,000 brands of bottled water. Water. So that's the environment that's happening out there. Now, why is it happening? Well, there are some basic laws in marketing. Many years ago, I wrote a book called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. And the law of division is what you're seeing here. 10th immutable law. Over time, a category will divide and become two or more categories. It's like an amoeba. You can't stop it. And that's what's happening. That's why you have so many brands. And this is a very important point. The mind is the battleground. Those ideas that are changing the world, the ideas about what makes your company different, it all plays out in the mind of your customer and your prospect. Whether it's Coke or Pepsi or Avis or whatever, it's the mind. That's what you have to learn. So let's talk about repositioning the competition. In other words, what is that about? Well, here's the strategy. To hang a negative perception on your competition as a way to set up a positive perception about your company, your product, or whatever. And it's a simple observation that the public can verify for themselves. Here's an example. Here's the classic. Advil, which is an ibuprofen, advanced pet medicine for pain. This was a good idea. This was an idea that didn't change the world, but it was a very good idea. And how did they reposition the competition? Well, they did it very simply. They said, look, aspirin has been around since 1899. Tylenol, 1955. Advil, today. In other words, they said, we are the new pain reliever. We are the advanced technology. This was a classic, brilliant execution. The result today, Tylenol's number one, 22%, but Advil now is a strong number two, and everybody else is nowhere. So here's a classic example of repositioning the competition. Here's a new one, Starbucks. Starbucks is being repositioned by McDonald's. McDonald's says Starbucks is snobby coffee. They have a website that says unsnobbycoffee.com. They're hanging a negative on Starbucks to say, look, we have very good coffee, but it's essentially a lot cheaper. My favorite repositioning is going on right in the PC business. This is Mac, Apple's Mac, versus the PC. And what you have here is some television commercials where you have this cool guy saying, I'm a Mac, and he's sort of ridiculing the nerdy PC guy. Very interesting, very effective campaign that repositions the PC. All right, change. Change is, and I know you've probably heard a lot about this at this conference, change. Technology can force you to adapt your brand to changing circumstances, but you must never lose contact with your basic position. In other words, you have to find a way to evolve. The facts of change have been laid out by a terrific book called The Innovator's Dilemma. Clayton Christensen wrote this book, and what he talked about was disruptive technology. He said, look, you want to see some technology? Look at it. Photographic film is now digital photography. Goodbye Kodak. Wireline telephony is now mobile. Notebook, handheld appliances. Bricks and mortar retailing, online. Manned aircraft, now it's all about unmanned aircraft. And, you know, on and on and on. So you get the general idea that if you're not careful, you can get wiped out by a disruptive technology. Now, here's a very important point. Convergence or evolution. Many mistake convergence as a form of evolution in a changing environment. Well, we'll just put a whole bunch of things together. But this is rarely the case. People want the best of the breed, not a multifunctional product. You tend to evolve to something new. That's the better way to handle this thing. There are some problems with this thing called convergence. Number one, the complexity issue. Here are 3 failures. The AT&T personal communicator, which had a phone and a fax, electronic mail, personal organizer, and a pen-based computer. Very complicated. The docket had a printer, fax, scanner, copier. Too complicated. Apple, back when they weren't successful, had a thing called a Newton, fax, beeper, calendar keeper, pen-based computer. These 3 products were disasters, and they failed very quickly. Too complicated. Next problem is the engineering. Everybody's trying to cram complicated fixtures into ever sleeker, ever thinner boxes while increasing battery life. To do this, designers must make compromises, you know, which means functions that don't work very well. I mean, the Apple, the iPhone, I mean, has it got too many functions, too many apps? It's getting a little complicated, but it's a success. But interestingly enough, if you look at the reviews of the smartphones right now, BlackBerry's great at email, phone is barely adequate. Palm's Trio stores data well, unreliable and unremarkable. Motorola's Q phone is fine, but it crashes as often as the Trio. And of course, the iPhone, terrific for music and media, but lousy for email and phoning. In other words, you see the strengths that emerge, but it's hard to be everything for everybody successfully. And yet the iPhone, I have to say, is a success. Why is that? Why is it a success? You're seeing evolution to something new. Cell phone is rapidly changing into a multi-function computer. They should be repositioned not as smartphones, but as computer phones. This is really what these little instruments are becoming. And I think that's an opportunity for one of the manufacturers to jump on this idea. I mean, Samsung, who is the number 2 player now in cell phones, they can become the first cell phone manufacturer to lay claim to the concept of computer phone, thus repositioning themselves apart from their competitors. Obviously, you got to have the right product and whatnot, but there is an idea. Remember, I'm talking about ideas that can change your company. This is a good idea. The first into the mind is the winner with these kinds of ideas. Just to give you a sense of what can go wrong, I want to take you through a convergence disaster. It all began way, way long ago. 1970, a gentleman made a speech. He was the head of Xerox, and he predicted a big-time convergence in the office. He said, the office of the president, he said, has 3 legs. Communications, AT&T, telephone. IBM, typewriter, word processor, computers. And, of course, the copier. There we sit. So they were there, and they said, look, this is the office of the president. He said it's all going to converge. The office of the future will be an office automation system. All these functions will come together. So with that, he went out and he bought a computer company because he had to have that one piece. So what happened? 20 years, $2 billion trying to sell a Xerox machine that cannot make a copy. Any Xerox machine that cannot make a copy, you know, is not a Xerox machine, because that's what a Xerox is in the mind. What they missed was what I call the third leg opportunities. What happened, no convergence, these legs descended. Voicemail, fax, typewriters, computer workstations, networks, and of course, you got into computer printing, scanning, storage. So in a way, Xerox missed an incredible opportunity. They should have chose an evolutionary strategy. In other words, move from xerography to lasography and preempt that surge in laser printing. That's what happened. And of course, they didn't do it. Who did it? Hewlett-Packard. They pioneered, they made a ton of money on the laser printer. You know who invented laser printing? Xerox. But that was a big idea that did indeed, have a big impact on the world, but they missed it. If they wanted to continue, now they should get into what I call document engineering. That to me is going to be another big idea that they could work with if they so chose. All right, now the number 3 thing, crisis. Now we have a very difficult time. This is a situation where really the economic environment forces a change in strategy to reflect the times. Companies must add value to their position. That's the game today, value. Michelin says, hey, more miles, more fuel efficiency, more than what you pay for, value. Sprint, find things you didn't know you were lost, productivity, more value. Hyundai, terrific value idea. If you lose your job, we'll take the car back. This has had a big impact in the U.S. market. This has helped them enormously. It's an idea that has certainly helped their company dramatically. Interesting company that I've done a lot of work for called Sonosite, and it sort of tells you how you do this thing. Situation. This is a company that pioneered what we call the handheld ultrasound machines. Small machines, and they challenged the big cart machines. Big machine performance in a small machine is what they were selling. Its positioning strategy was establish leadership perceptions. They had a big idea, a handheld ultrasound, and essentially has been very successful. And this was their strategy. World leader and specialist in hand-carried ultrasound. That has been what's driving the company. But the crisis hit. Hospitals began to feel the financial crisis. So the question is, how do you adjust perceptions to accommodate this new environment? How do you add value to your base message? Classic example of repositioning. And here's an ad they ran. Why a small machine is making a big impact in healthcare. These machines are saving time and money while improving safety and patient outcomes. Sonosite, world leader and specialist in hand-carried ultrasound. So they've maintained that basic position, but they've done some adjusting, adding value to the story. And even the iPhone is how to stretch your budget one application at a time. So you're beginning to see people add value. Now, let's talk about a real crisis, our friends at General Motors. Now, this has been widely publicized. It's a good story, and I think it's a story you have to understand that what happened. Sometimes to get a sense of a company and going wrong, you got to go way back. 1921. This is what General Motors looked like. 7 brands selling cars at about the same price, if you'll notice, with the exception of Cadillac. So it was a mess in a way, and a gentleman called Sloan arrived, and he said, no, I'm going to reposition all these brands, get rid of some, and I'm going to have low priced and low medium and medium. And so he took it up step by step, up to ultra high line, and essentially said, here are the 5 brands. They're going to do this. A Chevy, a Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Buick, and Cadillac. So that strategy took this company to half of the U.S. car business, 50%. Then they decided, well, we moved into what we call the GM disaster. For financial reasons, they forgot Sloan's plan. In other words, they decided they couldn't get any more market share. We don't want to get beyond 50% because the government might break us up. So what we're going to do is we're going to make more money. And the way they make more money is to begin to make these cars look alike. Same parts. And also, they began to move away from the plan. Fortune magazine, many years ago, ran a picture. This is an actual cover of a magazine. They took 4 of these, put them in a field, took a picture, and we saw for the first time that these cars all looked alike. And they had a prophetic headline that said, "Will success spoil General Motors?" We now know the answer. Absolutely. And so now, if you look at what happened to their pricing, it's the same problem. They had now had 6 brands, and again, the pricing was pretty much in the same. 10 to 21, 13 to 45, 16 to 32. See, what happened is, essentially, to make money, they forced the one brand, like Chevrolet, to go up and sell expensive Chevrolets. Buick went down to sell cheaper Buicks. So in other words, they all started to become everything for everybody and destroyed the brands. That's what happened. But what happened in the United States, to kill a brand can cost almost $1 billion. Union contracts, franchise laws, local dealerships. Sloan could do this a lot easier. And of course, the crisis arrived. They went to Washington for billions in loans. Future is still in jeopardy. But they eliminated the brands, and the crisis made this possible because then they could, by going bankrupt, they didn't have to live with all of these contracts. And of course, today we have, or going forward, what do we have now? We have Chevrolet. That should be positioned as America's favorite American car. That's what they should do. Buick, high quality without paying for status. That's what they should do about Buick. Leading edge technology for Cadillac. And of course, the GMC, rugged reliability. See, what you have to have is you've got to have an idea that you can attach to each one of these brands that differentiates it, that separates it. And if they don't do that, it's going to be very difficult. And I'll give you, here's where they are today. Right now, here's an ad for a GMC. 100,000 miles of confidence, okay? And what do they have at the bottom of this ad? May the best car win. That's a stupid idea. What does that mean? What they should have is rugged reliability. That's what they should have. In other words, what's a GMC? It is a tough, rugged car that's very reliable. And we can prove it, 100,000 miles of confidence. That's what I mean by, what's your idea? How do you drive that idea into the mind? Now, this stuff takes courage. You got to be willing to make some bold moves sometimes. Interesting story. We're in a world of barcodes, as you know. Everything's got barcodes. There's an interesting piece of technology that reads these barcodes, because somebody's got to read them. And this is a machine that is made in all places, Argentina. This is a very successful reader that comes from Argentina. And it's a laser-based machine. It's a company that's called Competiton. And they appeared in my office some years back, and we said, there's a branding confusion between the corporate name, Competiton, and the product name, Multiscan. And then we said, you have a made in Argentina problem of technology perceptions. In other words, if it comes from Argentina, how can it be a leading edge piece of technology? They're known for beef and leather and, stuff like that. So the CEO of the company said, all right, what do I do? We said, number one, change the name to Multiscan. Take your product name and make that your name. Number two, take advantage of your leadership. We're a leader in laser barcode document reading. That's good. And we said, do you happen to have an office in the United States? And they said, oh yeah, we have one in Miami. Okay? We're going to move you to the U.S. Your headquarters will now be in the USA, not in Argentina. Which is a bold move for a guy who comes from Argentina. So, this is his business card, right? We started off with CompuData, Roberto Martinez Taylor, La Plata in Argentina. First, we said, all right, you got to have the courage to change your name. It's going to become Multiscan. We're a leader in laser barcode document readers. That's your position. And you're still in La Plata, okay? We're going to move you to Miami, Florida. There he is in Miami, Florida. Then we said, Roberto, we have one other problem. He said, what's that? Well, your name doesn't sound very American. Would you mind if we change your name? He said, what to? We want you to become Robert M. Taylor, Chairman, Multiscan in Miami, Florida. This took a lot of courage. He said, all right, I'll change the company name, and I'll change my name, and I'll move to Miami. And the results, he dramatically increased his sales 10%. His exports went up dramatically, and they now sell in 55 countries. So sometimes to reposition yourself, you need a little bit of conviction and courage. Another important principle, it takes time. This doesn't happen overnight. Lotus, let's go back a ways. Lotus was a company that pioneered the spreadsheet for the PC, and they had a problem. They were, in the mind, the spreadsheet company. But the spreadsheet was under attack. Microsoft was coming out with Excel. So you had a problem to deal with, and the game of software was changing. Excuse me. Here's an article that the chairman of Lotus gave me. He said, read this. He said, networks of computers are changing the way business works. This was early on. The internet hadn't arrived. So he was a standalone piece of software. And now, but what he did in that article, we discovered he had a breakthrough product called Notes, the first successful groupware program. This is right in that article. And so we saw a very simple repositioning strategy. You should say, first the spreadsheet, now groupware. In other words, you have evolved, but you've stayed connected to what you were in the mind. But now you've added something. Your new focus is the concept of groupware. And off he went, and it was an enormous amount of PR effort. Lotus development relies on Notes to write success. This is finally catching on. His Fortune magazine said that groupware can get everybody in a company into the act. Business Week, Lotus Notes gets a lot of notice. Users praise groupware. Rivals scramble to catch up, and groupthink takes hold. Lotus crows as Microsoft and WordPerfect bow to Notes. Notes is a big idea. And essentially, this idea was taking hold, and a lot of people were writing about it. And that was the key to his survival. Meet the group that pioneered the first groupware program. This was the software team that did it. So what happened, in 4 years, he moved from being a spreadsheet company to a groupware company. And it was painful and it was expensive, but he did it. And along comes IBM and says, we'll give you $3.5 billion for this company, and they did. And what they were buying was Notes and groupware. But he hung in there and he repositioned the company against his new idea. Now, this repositioning is simplicity and common sense. It's not a complicated deal. Too many companies get involved in marketing and they just get too complicated. See, complex strategies like complex battle plans are doomed to failure. Too many things that can go wrong. People don't admire complexity. They don't trust something that's simple. So keep it simple. Now, this is the Iraq success plan. I got this from the Pentagon. Can you believe this? That is an absolute thing. You know, this is what was going to win in Iraq. They were doomed. No wonder that thing was such a mess. Now, here's a current piece of complexity. Boeing, the manufacturing plant. We're going to make parts all over the globe. We're going to ship them in from Korea, Japan, Goodrich, Italy. It's unbelievable. And this plane is now 2 years behind schedule. And it's just because one piece goes wrong, that's it. We got a problem. So it's a great idea on paper, but it's too complicated. And that's what's the problem. Now, let's take a company called Silicon Graphics. This is a good example of evolution. This was a workstation company. Number one, they opened up with a simple idea, 3D computing, and they pioneered this idea. But the world moved on, and then they went to a bigger idea, visual computing, the visualization thing. But again, more pressure. And the next step was to go into high-performance computing. In other words, what I was recommended, they become sort of the Porsche of workstations. High performance. And they had some very good credentials. They had some big, fancy, high-powered servers. They had very impressive visual workstations. And, of course, they had a RISC-UNIS operating system, which was, as you know, a serious operating system. But you know what? Wall Street shows up and says, high-performance computing, that's a niche. And that you can't grow at 20% a year with that. So they didn't seize that simple idea. They got into something they never should have, and they're bankrupt. They declared bankruptcy. They indicated that, you know, bad investments in the 90s and PCs and stuff like caused their problems. My message to you is better to be small and specialized than big and bankrupt. That's what can happen to you out there. It's a tough, competitive world. It's obvious. And that's a very important, in other words, this isn't rocket science. You're looking for simple, obvious ideas to change your company, or if you want to change the world, fine. But it's an obvious. 5 tests. The problem when solved will be simple. Simple. Does it make sense to you as a checkout with human nature? Put it on paper. You got to be able to put it on paper. It's your story. Good marketing is good storytelling. So you have to be able to put it on paper. And does it work in people's minds? This is positioning, in the mind. It has to work in the mind or you lose. And is the timing right? Very important. Can't be too soon. Can't be too late. So these are the 5 basic principles or tests of obviousness. Now, I'll give you an idea of how simple this is. Let's take Hyundai. They have an obvious strategy they should move with. If you look at it, they recently had a J.D. Power's initial quality survey, and it ranked Hyundai 4th behind Lexus, Porsche, and Cadillac. Now, that's amazing when you consider how expensive these cars are. This could be the basis for a very powerful repositioning idea, especially in the U.S. market. If I were running this company, here's the idea. More car for the money. In other words, more value for the money. What you get in this car, you have to pay a lot more for in these other cars. And that I think is an idea they can support, and I think that would resonate very well in these times, these crisis times. It's simple, it's obvious, they could take advantage of it. Now, hey, let's go to Samsung. They've climbed into the lead in television sets, Number 2 in cell phones. And they're very big in memory technology. This could be the basis for the following repositioning. In other words, if I were to say, what's Samsung's problem in the U.S., not here, U.S., people will say, what's the Samsung? No idea. I mean, I see them around, but I have no idea for what this company is. Who are they? In other words, they have a super opportunity to drive a simple idea into the minds of the marketplace. The world's fastest growing electronics company. That happens to be a true statement. And they have the credentials to prove it. So, and let me show you. In other words, what are they missing? Well, here's one of their recent ads. Less energy, more performance, Samsung. And it's some of their memory devices. Now, there's nothing in this ad that tells me about what's Samsung. Who are they? I know they're in Korea, but what is that? That doesn't mean anything. So, here's what they do. World's fastest growing electronics company. Just hang it right there at the bottom of the ad. That's what I mean by taking a very simple, obvious idea, and that explains who Samsung is. And that is an impressive idea. Impressive. Let me leave you with a very important quote from a gentleman named Peter Drucker. He is the father of business consulting. The best. Nobody is close to Peter Drucker. He said something that I think you should remember, because it's a quote that's been lost in the shrouds of history. He said, look, his advice was the purpose of a business is to create a customer. And because of that, the business enterprise has 2 and only these 2 basic functions: marketing and innovation. He said both these generate new customers. Marketing, innovation produce results. All the rest are costs. And marketing is the distinguishing, unique function of the business. What makes you different? Now, you've just spent 2 days talking about innovation, I guess. That's part of it. So, and I've just spent 45 minutes talking about marketing. But believe me, these are the 2 things that you really should learn to do very well. Marketing, which is all about driving those, coming up with those ideas and driving those ideas into the minds of your customers and your prospects. And innovation, which is at the heart of these ideas in many cases. So, in a way, if you can do those 2 things well, marketing and innovation, you're going to do very well in this very difficult world. Thank you.